G'day, Mark Buttigieg here, New South Wales Labor MP. I want to introduce you to my inaugural podcast, which looks into what I think has been the most dramatic turnaround in an election campaign I have ever seen in politics. The Labor Party is on track to win government for a second term, and the podcast will go into the reasons as to why that's the case. This Saturday, we face an important choice. Obviously, I'm voting Labor, the party I believe in, which can change the country for the better. You should too. Okay, welcome, Paul,
Thank
to
you.
my inaugural podcast, which we're calling Well May We Say. I'm sure you'll appreciate the significance of that.
Yes, I did.
Paul's an old mate of mine from, 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
We knew each other from Sutherland Shire politics. Former Sutherland Shire councillor and a representative on the council at Islington in the UK.
Yep.
Long political experience and now a director of YouGov.
That's correct.
So thank you very much for being a guest. Mm-hmm. Paul, I just wanted to start off with, I suppose, what's a fairly obvious question given the evolution of the federal election campaign, which we're knee deep in now, neck deep in actually. It's quite amazing in my experience, the turnaround we've experienced in a relatively short time, perhaps say 4 to 5 weeks, where we sort of seem to have come to a position, if you listen to the polls, that the Labor government was either neck and neck with the coalition or indeed perhaps in danger of losing government to a Dutton-led coalition, to a position where it appears as though the Labor Party is either going to win minority or majority. Just want to get your thoughts on that and what the data and the polling is telling you about the dynamics driving that.
Yeah, it's a very important question because actually we did the largest poll in the country. It's called an MRP poll in mid-February of this year. And that shows...
Sorry, Paul, MRP...
It means multi-regional post-stratification, which is, we call it Mr. P. Basically, it's a way of working out, not just taking a poll, but then matching that to the different levels of data you have about each constituency, because votes don't change in a uniform fashion. So, for example, if there are more younger people and more younger people voting Labor, increase in the vote disproportionately works that way. Except in this instance, we run about 25,000 simulations of the different possibilities with 40,000 pieces of data and match that across 150 electorates.
Right.
So that's it's not just a poll; it's a whole model that can read the different ways different seats work because they've got different demography, and that drives that.
So this isn't purely superficial interpretation of people's answers. This is taking people's responses and then extrapolating that through a behavioural model.
It's actually called a Bayesian model, and it's like having lots of different little buckets of information. The machine learns about those, and basically what it does is when there's new data, it allocates the little pieces of data that it makes out of that to the different pots to affect it disproportionately, according to the demography of the electorate, but also what it learns about different behaviour. Like, is a particular candidate doing better than others? It learns about the sort of things that go along. So it's a fairly sophisticated model, but what it showed us in the very first instance was that in February of this year, the coalition would have won 73 seats. 73 seats which would have had huge victories for the coalition in our suburban and regional working class Australia. And that was happening not so much because the coalition was doing very well, but because the Labor vote was, primary vote was falling, and it was falling disproportionately in outer suburban Sydney and Melbourne and certain traditional working class places like the Hunter Valley. This was because voters felt that the government had not done enough for working class voters. They felt that the government was not making a fundamental difference to their lives. So their expectations were not so much that they were unhappy about what the government had done, but they felt that not enough was being done. They were looking for a transformational change, and what they felt they were getting was not very much at all, and piecemeal things that felt that wasn't meeting the fundamental economic challenges that they were facing.
Right.
So disappointment and a fading vote, and Labor losing seats in outer Western Sydney like Werriwa, or places like Patterson and Hunter in the Hunter Valley, McEwen in northern suburbs of Melbourne, all across the country, Labor was losing those seats.
So the dynamic that is in the interim, so that was February this year.
That's right, and because and this was looking very much like the Dutton strategy was. He announced last year the Liberals were going to be the party of the working class. That his strategy was to win these sorts of places, because he had decided not to go after the teal seats that they'd lost in the upper middle class and wealthy parts of Sydney and Melbourne.
Yes.
He decided to go for those voters.
Yeah.
And he was well placed to do that. But the thing about polling is, for most of the time, it's a referendum on the government. And there's a time in which the voters switch to it being a choice between the two parties. The choice moment was when people clicked in, was just after Trump versus Zelensky, and that's when the Liberal Party decided to announce their work from home and their Doge-style cutting of the public service, just at the moment when those working people were paying attention. This has been their catastrophic undoing. It has fundamentally altered the nature of the race, because particularly work from home, this is actually we've polled people in Sydney and Western Sydney in those electorates, and over 80% of those people would support a legal right to work from home. This is because it is fundamentally part of the way in which families are now, particularly those who are juggling 2 jobs or more, travelling long distances, how they manage things when things are already tight and stressful and financially stretched. And this is one of the things I think surprised people when we were immediately telling them a week after or 2 afterwards, this is the biggest impact that any policy announcement has ever made. The polling shifted about 2 points, which is quite a significant change, and it has gone downwards from that. And
were both those factors, i.e., we don't want you to work from home and we're going to sack a good portion of the public service, were they both of equal significance?
I think they were both significant. The work from home was more universal because things take place in a context. And the context for Australians is twofold. Firstly, in relation to work from home, there's already been an employer offensive going on in which some employers have been pushing people to come back to work. This is resented enormously by the vast majority of the workforce. And people have felt that the public sector setting that standard, which is very much the message from the government, was that we're going to make people do it because we want everyone to do it. That was the unspoken but clear message which the public heard. The other thing that people heard about the Doge-style work from home, abolition of public sector jobs, was that Australians are living in an age when many Australians feel insecure about their own job. And the last thing they want to do is to hear the government literally identifying with the sort of saw-wielding Elon Musk approach. They feel that seems disturbing, and it feeds into their own insecurity that if people in the public sector who are perhaps supposed to have more or traditionally have had more job security than others, they're going to be getting rid of. The government making that a priority and kind of seeing that as being a good thing, sacking workers can't be a good thing, and it fed into a feeling about insecurity, and that there was already, at the same time that the Trump government was creating international instability, and at a time when people were looking for security, the coalition seemed out of touch with workers and represented risk.
So notwithstanding those two announcements from Dutton, which have turned out to be quite big mistakes, which is what you're telling us, and what's been borne out by all the commentary, was there a predisposed view of both leaders that Dutton was closer to Trump, and that became a big disadvantage once Trump turned everything upside down? Was that part of it?
I think what happened is people joined the dots. He announced it as a Trump-style policy quite explicitly.
So he could have attenuated that predisposition by not announcing those policies.
If he had not announced those two policies, he would still be in a much better position to win this election.
And tell me, Paul, so this is, I mean, it's hard for a Labor politician to sometimes grasp these things, and as politicians, I suppose it's important to divorce what you're seeing from the commentariat versus what the average person is thinking, which may not necessarily be the same two things. And we see that in our interaction with voters when you're out in the field. But what I'm interested in is that if you've got a situation where the macroeconomic indicators are all pointing in the right direction, unemployment's coming down, inflation's dropping, wages are growing, but for whatever reason people weren't feeling that success materially, where is that incongruence coming from? Is it just because there hasn't been enough time for it to sink in?
I think people, political class generally, have fundamentally misunderstood their role. You're not there. It's good to have the skills to be able to sort of tweak the economic machine, but what people are looking for is the fundamental transformative change, and for the government to be on their side. To use an American example, in 1936, Franklin Delano Roosevelt famously declared himself the enemy of all capitalists, industrialists, bankers, and I'm going to fight for you. In his acceptance speech for the 1936 election, he said, all these people are opposed to me because I'm on your side. And I revel in their hatred, was his famous phrase. That candidate would have beaten Donald Trump in the election because he spoke to working class people about, I understand the depression's tough, you know I'm fighting for you because I've been doing the New Deal, you've seen the changes I've made, but I want to do more, but they're trying to stop me and I'm on your side. And he won the largest electoral college victory a Democrat has ever won.
So, in essence, you're saying that there is a definite desire from the electorate to have a more equitable distribution of wealth and income?
We poll all the time, and they see, and the constant message on any topic is they want the government to make dramatic changes to the way things work. For example, 84% of Australians would like to see bulk billing made the law. You can't charge more than the scheduled fee. The government sets the fee. That's it.
And this is where the Albanese urgent care clinics have been a really big hit. I've picked this up on the campaign trail.
They have certainty.
Massive popularity.
They have certainty when you go there.
Yeah.
You know, because the problem is we found that the vast majority of Australians think it's harder to get Medicare because it's the health provider, the private company, who decides what you're charged. And this can be quite random, and it's all about what the margin they think they can make. That's not the way you run a healthcare system. People will understand it's a right. They just want the government to say, I'm setting the fee, and this is what it will be. And that's how they would like it to be run. So the difficulty the government has had is that they've tried to run within a model that has the decision maker is not the elected person.
So have we essentially got an electorate, your polling and the data and the research is saying that we've got an electorate that wants a social democracy, a left of centre mixed economy redistributive model, and then when they started to examine which side could deliver that, they came to the conclusion that what the Conservatives were offering was not that. But originally, before the campaign, they were toying with the idea that maybe they could.
I think the great parallel in this election is between the 1993 election, where the electorate rejected fight back, and the current situation, because you have a very similar situation where Labor were on track to becoming the first minority government.
Yes, I remember that very well.
That's only...
In fact, Keating wasn't expected to win that 93 election, from memory.
He was not expected to win that election. I'm saying the current government was not. Was also on track to being the first one-term government since 1931, because they had not met expectations. But when people go to make that choice, and the thing that caught the electorate's attention was the work from home and the public sector cuts, then they looked at them for the first time and went, are you really on my side? And then they made a decision that they weren't about that issue. And once you start to rate people negatively, you look for... I don't normally pay attention to politics, but actually I don't like that thing, so maybe there's other things I don't like as well. And what has happened, and our polling shows this, Dutton started out at -2 in his negativity rate. Well, Albanese is at -12. Today, he's -18. And
Dutton.
So he's gone down in the last 2 months, -2 to -18. He was only 2 points behind Albanese's preferred Prime Minister. Now he's 15. On that metric, Albanese only led in the inner cities amongst women, because there are 4 categories of electorate: inner, outer, provincial and rural. As of a week ago, he led on outer for the first time, and now he leads amongst provincial and rural voters, because they are deciding to reject Dutton because they didn't like what he stood about work, but now they're looking at other things and they're going, you don't seem like you've got it sorted. You seem to be making up one thing one day.
So this input into the electorate's collective consciousness, where is it coming from? Is it the leaders' debates? Is it the general macro media, still the traditional forms of the Sydney Morning Herald, Sky News, or is it?
It's completely outside that.
Right.
I'll give you an example. We did a poll the week after the budget, which is supposed to be the biggest political thing. And you know what? We asked people to name one thing that was in the budget. 65% could not. So the whole political theory about the budget, which the political class, the media, thought, because there was nothing there. I mean, if you're talking about a discussion about whether you fuel slightly cheaper or you get a coffee a week, you get a tax cut, it's not a big deal. But what people have done is, and the thing about the work from home started it, is people have talked in social media. Mothers groups are circulating, going, you heard about this work from home? How are we going to pick up our kids? Did you hear Peter Dutton say that when he was asked about work from home, that, well, if you can't work 5 days a week, why don't you just cut back to 2 or 3? These are families who are struggling to pay the rent with 2 incomes or to pay a mortgage. And to say that shows you don't understand them, and people have talked about that. It's the informal conversations and the discussions about those sorts of things this was on social media, a huge topic of discussion, and amongst because people talk, when people go talk to their partner about, well, if this came in, how would we manage? And say there are lots of stresses in their life already about how they manage who picks up for the school, and there's already stress about, who does what, and financial times of stress. He becomes part of that.
Yes.
And
adding to the pain instead of relieving it, where the counterpoint is, well, if I can go and see a bulk bill doctor after hours, that's a good thing, that it's alleviating some of the stress.
Yes.
And then superimposed on top of all of that, the uncertainty surrounding Trump and the perception that Dutton is close to Trump.
Yes, because then what happened was that once he became one risk, then they immediately said he's doing this because he wants to be like Trump. And then Trump is seen as a risk about stock markets crashing, tariffs going up and down every day. It's not like a policy. It's like it's up, it's down, it's moving around, and being associated with that. And then the coalition themselves, only yesterday suddenly said they were in favour of higher income taxes to pay for the defence. Not their policy last week. They were. It's whether it's about the EV vehicles or work from home or any other range of things. It's one thing one day, one thing another. You look like a risk. I'm rejecting you. But rejection, and we are looking at a situation where we've got polls coming out in seats like that Labor, we had as Labor was losing 6 weeks ago. We are saying Labor's now in front in Gilmore, they're going to lose that. They're in front in Hunter, they're going to lose that. They're in front in Patterson, they're going to lose that. They're in front in Boothby, they're going to lose that. They're in front in Lyons and Braddon, they're going to lose that, but Braddon's again. The whole row of seats you're looking at have moved decisively, so they're either with Labor or pretty close.
Now this is an interesting area because it seems as though the left of centre vote splits but comes back to Labor, whereas on the right, it's not coming back.
Well, what we're seeing is that
although they've preferenced, I noticed, I heard something on the radio today where they've preferenced quite a big proportion of One Nation candidates.
That's because what we'll show tomorrow in our poll is that One Nation are on course for getting their largest primary vote in the election for at least a decade, because they've got 147 candidates. That's almost every seat apart from 3 in Canberra, and that means that they will get a significant vote. And the coalition are now behind Labor in terms of the primary vote. We'll have them behind by 2 points tomorrow.
So that's a conscious decision on behalf of the coalition to try and pull back some of that.
It's the only choice they've got, because they would have every poll up until this week. We've had the coalition with a couple of percentage points more than the Labor Party, in some cases up to 5 or 6. And at the last election, there was a margin of 3.5%, I think, in terms of the primary vote. Now it's below. How do you make that up? That's the decision they've obviously made. But what will be interesting is what percentage of One Nation voters actually vote for the ticket. What we've been modelling is that at the last election, 62% of One Nation voters voted coalition because of the unpopularity of Scott Morrison. It would normally be about 70%. We were modelling that at 70% until a few weeks ago, and it's come down to 67%. And the trend is possibly going down because voters are making a decision, who are they putting last? And it's a choice between someone who Anthony Albanese is currently -7 and on his net satisfaction, and Mr Dutton is on -18.
So would the balance of that, let's call it 70%, would that balance of that One Nation preference flow, would the majority of that 30% residual go to Labor?
All of it.
All of it.
So if it comes down between Liberal and Labor, our current, I think, is 67 coalition, 33% Labor.
And you think that's heading in the
I
other?
think it might get, at the last election, it was 38% Labor, which was a record, because or record in recent times. There's been earlier times when it's not been quite like that. But certainly you would normally find at elections like recent Queensland state election where it's 70-30, and you would find that would be a normal figure. But Scott Morrison, how do I, if I'm a rebel against the system and I'm voting against all the parties and I'm voting for One Nation, who am I going to put last? Well, a lot of those voters decided Scott Morrison. I would have expected a larger percentage would say the guy in power at the moment, but it's shifting because Dutton has become such an unpopular character, but voters have looked at him.
But how are they, going back to my previous question, Paul, how are they looking at the two parties and the two leaders? If you listen to the received wisdom that people are not watching television or buying the Herald or necessarily listening to the ABC, is it coming back anyway via social media? And of course, on top of this, it's much more complex than that, isn't it? Because you're talking about different cohorts, like presumably young people have a totally different set of outcomes they want, and the communication with them is a different medium to, say, people our age. So just want to get your thoughts on that.
It's all very different for different people. We move in a much more fragmented media age. But I think what happens is that the experience, doesn't matter how old or young, is got one thing in common, in that is you may not be paying, you've got a busy life, you may not be paying, but it's what you capture out of the glimpse of your corner of your eye, or the conversation you have with a friend, or that sort of discussion where you kind of, for Dutton, it's been originating in the work from home, and then the connection with Trump is that people have that conversation.
This means that campaigns are very, very significant.
Yes.
Because if the leaders make a misstep or they're solid, it can actually change the whole dynamic.
That's true. And the other thing about campaigns is that people are most responsive to people talking to them personally, or having people they trust speak to them about something. And that is the most important part of campaigning is you don't need to spend all your time on the minutiae of what you're doing. You need to be able to communicate clearly what is the one fundamental thing you've done which is making a difference to everybody.
So I guess what matters in the modern era is because people tend to focus, or a lot of the commentariat tend to focus on the primary vote, but in a sense, and the level of the primary vote, and low 30s, we can never win government. But really, what matters is the gap between the two parties on the primary vote, because if the preference flow comes back to one or the other in a big enough percentage, and generally speaking, the Greens' preferences come back, you can bridge the gap. So in a sense, is it fair to say that the level of the primary vote doesn't matter, the absolute level doesn't matter, it's the relative level between the parties that matters?
It does, and the other thing is also about the social alignment of the population. Labor has an enormous opportunity to be the primary leader of a larger social coalition that looks to say we can make fundamental changes in housing, we can make fundamental changes in tax, we can do these things, fundamental changes in the way government works, and to lead the discussion where independents and Greens might follow because the population are looking for these changes.
Now tell me this, I know Cos Samaras has written about this before, this younger cohort of people that has become, I think, the single biggest cohort of people on the roll, how significant is that in the way they think about politics and their future in terms of the different ideological centres of gravity that the Coalition and Labor represent?
What they're interested in is what you're going to do, and what they're looking for is a huge change. No one wants to hear a policy that says in 10 years' time you might be able to get a house, maybe, because people want to. Why shouldn't it be the case that you should be able to get a house you can afford to live in now? People want, and this is policy, the urgency of the need for change. I mean, younger people under 40 are burdened with debt, particularly if they've gone to university, they've got insecurity at work, and housing they can't afford. That needs change right now, and that is the way to win people forever.
Just on that point, Paul, so how big an impact did the relative policies addressing those things that you've just touched on from each party, how big an effect did that have?
We polled people in Western Sydney, and less than 4% of people could name housing policies of either party a week following both their announcements.
This is the Labor Party with the 5% deposit and the 130,000.
We asked people, can you name a policy that will make you believe that one of the parties will do better? And only a very small percentage of people nominated the housing policies and could name them in an electorate where the housing is the second highest issue, but after cost of living, and is a huge issue across that, more so than the rest of Australia.
What about the HECS debt relief? Because you touched on that.
Again, the questions we've been asked is about what do you believe will change. About have you heard of the policy? I think what is people's experience is with the way policy works, is that government will announce a policy. The Prime Minister says, but what they don't deliver it unless there is a clear law that something should be the case, or a public sector delivery body that's universal. People don't believe that it will happen. We've polled most Australians, including most people who own homes, actually would like to see the price of housing go down. Politicians don't. That can't be right. But I can assure you that over 80% of Australians, including the majority of people who own homes, think that. We've asked them, would you like to see housing go down?
That's fascinating. It's quite counterintuitive, particularly living in Sydney, where there's this obsession with real estate and rising prices.
But everyone's on the. There's people. More and more people are not there. So, for instance, you might own your own house, but you've got children who are 30, 40, 50 still at home.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like people understand that housing should be related to the wage people earn. That some like my parents, father was a railway worker, my mum worked in a bank, they could buy a house for 4 or 5 times their salary. And that's what people think is reasonable, and that's what most people want. And radical measures that would, for example, we've polled that 80% of Australians plus would support banning people owning more than 3 houses, like being the law. That's because Australians think, why do you need more than 3 houses? You need a house, a holiday house. You might need one for a member of your family. What else would you need a house for? Because it's not an investment, it's a place to live. It's seen as a right. People want their values reflected in the economic arrangements they see fit.
Can I ask you, Paul, it's pretty obvious from what you've said here today and what we've seen in the campaign that the coalition, and particularly the leader Dutton, have made some fundamental errors. To what degree has the Labor Party campaign strategically maximised that as an advantage?
I think you don't have to be an expert to watch campaigns to see that the campaign run by the Labor Party and Paul Erickson has been well planned and disciplined, and has maximised, obviously had a plan of making Dutton the centre of attention and focusing negatively on him.
It seems to me as though, sorry to interrupt, that one of the key things about Albanese deciding to go later on in the piece turned out to be a pretty master stroke.
Oh, it was obviously the wise thing to do because you get more time, and the government needed more time. They weren't going to win an election on the date that they were called. They would not have. Certainly wouldn't be in a position with a majority government, and they were a long way behind, possibly more behind than they realised. But it has also been driven by the mistakes. We do most of our research actually for companies and brands, and you tell people if you want to market a product, you say this is what your audience thinks and wants, and they had no plan about if your strategy is to appeal to working class people. You actually have to have a policy at work that matches that, and they've actually shown that was their downfall. Didn't do their research, didn't have a strategy that was coherent, and that has been their downfall.
I think one more thing that occurs to me. We've got a phenomenon now where almost every state is governed by a state Labor government, and you hear two different views in the commentariat. One is that people differentiate between state and federal, and the other is a brand's a brand. If Labor are doing well at the states, then it translates through to federally. How much of a factor is that? I'm thinking about states like New South Wales, popular state government, South Australia, perhaps not so much in Victoria at the moment. How does all that playing out?
Look, I think in this particular case, people have identified the difference between Dutton and the Victorian government, which we have polling not as strongly as the federal government is currently. But that is because Dutton has been a lightning rod, and the one thing the public have not quite decided who they're voting for yet, but but most of them have decided who they're voting against. So that is where we're at, and Labor still has the possibility of doing a bit better or a bit worse, depending on how they play the next 10 days. But in a situation where there wasn't such a stark choice, then state factors can filter in. Because if the state government is seen as corrupt or badly managing or made some sort of catastrophic error, then it can feed into the whole of the brand. So it's one of those things that actually depends on the circumstances. This circumstance will be that it'll be entirely focused on who's going to be the Prime Minister, and 54% of Australians have a negative view on Peter Dutton, and that makes it hard to win more than 50% of the vote. If basically people go, I don't like him, and only 36% of Australians say they want him to be Prime Minister.
Final predictions, Paul? Majority, minority?
We will do a model on this that will come out next week, but the trend is very much towards majority, and that would be an extraordinary thing. Our model in February said that Labor had a 1% chance of forming a majority government, but in the course of the campaign, I think that's likely to be we did another poll, which is 38% chance a few weeks ago, and now we think, I think when we work it out, it'll probably end up being a majority chance.
Oh, well, a phenomenal turnaround, I think, is what's come out of this little interaction, and campaigns matter.
The campaigns matter. And whatever people model, it's the campaign on the ground. You can't model somebody going and knocking on an extra 10,000 doors, being a good candidate, communicating with their electorate. Those things matter. And so more than modelling a campaign or doing the research, that's observing something happening, but going out and doing it is actually what wins campaigns.
Great. Thank you very much, Paul. It's been a very, very entertaining and informing discussion, and really look forward to perhaps having you back after the election when we see what the actual result is.
Perfect.
Thanks, mate.